Today is December 3rd, 1984. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Mr. Rufus Murray Thames. Mr. Thames, where were you born?
I was born in Waters, Arkansas, 1890. It later became known as Pine Ridge by Lum and Abner, and they're broadcasting from the Jot 'em Down store.
When is your birthday? In
October 7, 1890.
Who is your father?
Robert Henry Thames.
And your mother?
Mother Sarah Emily Thames, Jones.
Joe.
Sarah Emily Jones Thames, it should have been.
Were they both from Arkansas?
Yes, sir.
What kind of work did your father do?
Well, he was a farmer, and he hauled freight and hauled passengers from them little towns, and we lived on the river, on the Arkansas River at Tamaha. Tamaha, Tamaha, as the Choctaws called it.
That's in Oklahoma.
Yeah. When did you come to Indian Territory?
1898 to begin with. We went back to Arkansas, Mena, Arkansas, after that, and we lived in Mena about 5 years. Then we came back to Tamaha, and I can't remember what year it was we come back about that time, but it's before statehood.
How come you moved to Tamaha?
Well, I had an uncle living there to begin with, and we went up there. They used to raise a lot of potatoes along the river bottom there in that sandy land, you know, and we went up there to pick up and haul potatoes the first time, and then we went back to Arkansas, and then we sold our homestead, and when we left Arkansas to come to the Indian Territory, we sold our homestead and came up in a couple of covered wagons, and we had about 25 head of cattle, and we brought them along with us, and we was several days on the road from Arkansas up to Tamaha.
Tell me about that trip.
Sir?
Tell me about that trip by wagon.
Well, we sold out my daddy homesteaded down there at Waters, and we sold out the homestead place, and he got a team of gray mules and a almost new Springfield wagon and $500, and we had a team, and we had, them days, people used to have bows that go over their wagon. I don't know whether you ever seen them or not, but they'd bow over and stick down on this side in the staples, and on this side in staples that'd hold the bows up there. And then they'd stretch a sheet over it, make it tight, and it'd turn water. And we left Arkansas. We had 2 wagons with sheets and bows and teams and that bunch of cattle, and
There was 7 children.
we just wound our way back through the mountains there through Poto, Oklahoma.
What year was that?
Well, I think it was, I'm not positive, but I think it was about 1890, about 1892 or 3, I don't remember which.
How old were you?
Well, I was born in 1890 and 90.
Oh, that was later than that. We had to do.
No, wait a minute. I'm mistaken in the date we left it. I was about 8 years old.
Okay, 1898?
Well, I'll say that's okay.
Yeah. What were your duties on the wagon trip? What chores did you have to do?
Oh, we didn't have much to do. We was in the wagon traveling, and the cattle had to go real slow with them cattle.
Did you have to drive the cattle?
No, I didn't. I had older brothers that did. And they had, my oldest brother had a horse, and he could keep the cattle going, and in other words, round them up, and we'd travel slow along. And
What did you pack in the wagons to bring with you? What household goods?
we had sleeping quarters in the top of the wagon, and underneath there, we had food and supplies and household things that we could haul. We couldn't haul very much in 2 wagons, but we did have quite a little bit of stuff, bedding and all like that, And
When you first settled in Tamaha, what kind of house did you live in?
my daddy built a little log house. It wasn't in Tamaha, but it was outside of Tamaha where we built this log house. And we lived there quite a while, and then finally we bought a place in Tamaha. Tamaha at that time was a pretty good little country town. It was on the river there, and the steamboat run up and down the river from Memphis to Fort Gibson. And it carried freight, to them little towns along, and stores for the people on both sides of that river up and down there. And it was pretty good business them days for old Captain Blakely, and he generally come up every Friday.
Who was Captain Blakely?
I don't know anything more about him, only I just knew he was the captain of that boat. And they hauled passengers and freight, and they had a crew on that boat that done the loading and unloading, and he hauled cotton. He baled cotton, and he'd haul that bale of cotton. And
You ever ride that boat?
yes, one time, from Tamaha to Fort Smith.
How long did that trip take?
Oh, I couldn't say. I'd say about 2 hours or something like that. It made pretty good time of going down the river, but coming up, he didn't come so fast. And we used to haul freight from that boat up into them stores there at Tamaha. And my father farmed, and we had a wagon that run from Tamaha to Stigler, and we'd haul passengers going that way. My dad did.
What kind of wagon did you have to haul passengers?
Springfield wagon with the horses, and if we had more than one passenger, we'd put on an extra spring seat. That's the seats there. You could put 3 spring seats on there, and you could carry 5 or 6 passengers in that wagon in their luggage.
How much would your father charge to haul people from Tamaha to Stigler?
If I remember right, it was about 50 cents.
Was Stigler the main town at that time?
Stigler?
Yeah.
Yeah, Stigler was the best town around there. It is considered a good town.
Ever hear of a man named R.M. Jones?
R.M. Jones.
Yeah.
Well, my uncle's name was John Jones, and he had sons, Clint Jones and Will Jones.
This guy came over the Trail of Tears from Mississippi, and he had a store in Tamaha around the Civil War. Of course, that was before you got there.
It must have been.
Yeah, he had a big house down on the Red River, but he had his store up at Tamaha.
His initials was,
R.M. Jones.
well,
He was a Choctaw Indian.
oh, I see.
Mhm.
I see.
In fact, he brought his slaves with him when he came across the Trail of Tears.
I see.
Yeah.
My mother's maiden name was Jones.
Where was she from? Arkansas?
Tennessee, I believe.
Tennessee.
And
Okay.
His father was born in Alabama.
On the farm there at Tamaha, what chores did you do?
I run a stalk cutter and hoed cotton and picked cotton and done everything it was to do.
How many pounds of cotton did you pick in one day?
Oh, Lord, I was a poor cotton picker. We hired the biggest part of it done, but I'll say that my brothers and I, we done all we could on picking cotton, because it was all busy. And
How big was the sack that you picked cotton with?
sack,
Yeah,
a 9-foot sack,
9 foot.
yeah, there was 9 foot, the cotton picking sacks were 9 foot, they were made that way. We bought them. 9-foot cotton sack, and you could pack about 75 pounds of cotton in one of them if you could drag it.
What about pulling bowls?
We had cotton. The men we'd hire we called them cotton picking bowl pullers. There was a family that traveled and they lived in a wagon and a campfire. They cooked on a campfire. They'd pick cotton for us, and they'd have a big log fire there, and there's lots of dead timber them days, and they'd keep a fire going there all the time, and they just lived right there and slept in their wagons, and they were cotton bowl pullers. And what I mean, they really would get them.
How many in that family?
My family?
No, and the ones that picked cotton for you.
Oh, there was about 6 or 7 of them, and they were poker players and cotton pickers.
Did they work in different farms around the area?
Yes, sir.
So they were the original migrant workers.
Yeah, they're migrant workers. That's what they were. And poker players.
Were any of was your father in the Civil War?
No, the Civil War was 1860 to 64. My mother was, and her mother, my grandmother, my grandfather on my mother's side was killed in that war, and they went to Fort Smith and lived in the fort, that old fort there at Fort Smith, till after the war. And the bushwhackers burned my grandmother's house and took all the things that they could carry away and drove off their cattle, what cattle they had, during that war.
Which side, you say he was killed in the war, which side was he fighting on?
What side of what?
You say that your grandfather was killed in the war?
Yeah.
Which side was he on, north or south?
It must have been on the south.
On the south. Did your mother ever talk about what the times were like inside Fort Smith?
Oh, she was only 5 years old, I believe. She was born in 57, and the war was from 60 to 64, and she and my grandmother lived in that fort there after they lost their father, and she lost a brother too. And then after the war was over with, why, she had another brother or two other brothers, and they went out back into the neighborhood of where they lived and built a house, and she lived there, and my mother and father were married there, and they lived there till my grandmother died.
How big was Fort Smith at that time? Do you know?
No, I don't. I know one thing. I had a cousin that drove a streetcar there, a horse pulled by horses. They had horses for pulling streetcars there in Fort Smith at that time, and my cousin worked there all of his life on that streetcar. They finally got streetcars, but they were pulled by horses.
His grandfather is buried in the cemetery at Fort Smith.
People wouldn't believe such a thing as that, but it was true.
Did you know your grandmother?
I've seen her and remember her, but I don't remember
Yeah.
much about it, my grandmother.
Ever hear any stories about when the North captured Fort Smith?
No, no.
Could you give me a description of what the town of Tamaha looked like when you lived there?
Yeah, Tamaha was a nice little town. It had a bank, had a hotel, and had 5 or 6 stores, general stores. Most all of them were general stores. They carried a line of everything. And they had a cotton gin there.
Blacksmith shop?
They opened up a coal mine there. One of the first coal mines that opened up was right south of Tamaha, there, a strip pit. And I worked there and drove a team of mules there, stripping the soil off of the coal. Blaylock brothers, Clyde and Clarence Blaylock, opened up that first strip mine there on the Sam Fortner place. The creek had washed the dirt away, and you could see the vein of coal there.
How thick was the vein?
Oh, I'd say 30 inches thick. I'm just guessing at that, but it must have been that. For I worked there and drove a team of mules on that. We slipped the dirt off, plowed up with a great big plow, and slip it away down to the coal, and then break the coal off and haul it and go to selling it.
How'd you break the coal?
Oh, they had to use black powder for drill a hole down through it with a hand drill. Hand drill was the kind that you'd turn, hit them up here and turn them and hit it and turn it and hit it.
How long did you work at that mine?
I didn't work very long. I got a little money, and I wanted to get away from Tamaha, and
Where did you start the school?
Where did I start the school? The first school I went to was down in Arkansas on that homestead at Caney School. Just a little one-room schoolhouse. And one professor taught all the kids that come there. And they had a few benches in there, and there wasn't very many that come to that school. But they had a big spring there, and that's where they got the water. And this professor would teach all the classes, like the first reader and the second reader. And them. If you had 2 or 3 in the first reader, you'd come up there and sit on the bench and recite to him. And if you had up what we call the 5th grade now, they'd sit up there, and the older ones would sit up there. And he spent the day there in that little schoolroom teaching what few come.
Now, was that there by Waters, Arkansas?
That is Waters, Arkansas,
Okay.
yeah.
What kind of house did you have there on the homestead?
What kind of what?
House.
House?
Yeah.
Well, we had it was a lumber house. My father built it there, and there was a sawmill not too far away from there, and he hauled some lumber and built the house there.
Who ran the sawmill?
Huh?
Who ran that sawmill?
I just couldn't remember. I don't know.
How come you wanted to get away from Tamaha?
Oh my goodness! I got tired of picking cotton, and
How old were you?
oh, I don't know. I was about 17 or 18, I guess. I run away from home the first time. stole a fisherman's boat.
Where'd you go?
Went down the river about 7 or 8 miles and pulled a boat up on the bank and walked to Salisaw. Me and an Indian boy, or Indian friend,
What was his name?
Breck Forrest. Breck Forrest, he was a Choctaw Indian.
Mm-hmm.
We rented land from his mother. We farmed on her bottom land.
Tell me about some other Choctaws you knew in Tamaha.
Who?
Some other Choctaws around Tamaha.
Oh, Alec Burns. Alec Burns had a nice big home there, and we lived in his home. He was alone, but he had some children. Little Alec and Jackson and Alice was one of the girls. I can't think. Lizzie, Alice and Lizzie. And he sent all of them to school at Tishomingo, Indian school there. He was a well-to-do Choctaw Indian, but he was a mean booger. We got along real good with him, but he had killed a few men. He'd get drunk, and fight. But he lived in the house with us. He ate at the same table we did, and we just got along fine. He used to use me going to hunting to carry the rabbits and the ducks that we'd shoot along the creek there. He lived right on a creek. And Alec, now his son Jackson went up here to Three Sands. I don't know whether you know anything about Three Sands or not, but
That's about Pawhuska, I think.
he had a pool hall there at Tamaha, and they opened up them oil fields up at Three Sands, and he went up there and put in a pool hall, and he was quite a gambler and a pool player, but anyway, he got into a little trouble some way, and they arrested him. 2 deputies did arrest him, and they chained him up with a chain, and they wrangled him around quite a bit, and he killed both of them after he got loose. They was in a restaurant eating, and he just went in where they was at and shot both of them, and they put him in the penitentiary, and I don't know whatever happened to him.
Mm-hmm. Ever know any Choctaws that came on the Trail of Tears?
No, I can't recall any Choctaws that come on the Trail of Tears. The Cherokees was I don't know that the Choctaws come over the Trail of Tears, did they?
About the same time the Cherokees did.
Did they?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know much about them. I know more about the Cherokees than I did about the Choctaws.
Well, tell me about the Cherokees.
Oh, well, I used to work with them. George Mac, wait just a minute. George McGowan, I believe his name was. Well, anyway, right north of Vian, Oklahoma, the Indians had a fire that kept it going, a continuous, all the time. They brought it from over the Trail of Tears with them, and they kept that fire going there. I don't know whether they do yet or not. But this George that I worked with, he had a bunch of their Christian laws. He was a Christian, and I've got a bunch of it here yet that he gave me of their laws, And he was a nice fellow. He was a Mason, and he was a nice fellow. And then I got a friend that lived at Okmulgee here. He's 100 years old, his last birthday, and he lived with his niece. She was related to me. She married, her husband was my nephew, and he lived with her until she got to where her health, she couldn't take care of him, and he's up at Omaha, Nebraska now, living with a sister, and he was Cherokee.
What's his name?
Alberti.
Alberti.
I have his history if you'd like to glance over.
Yeah. Are you a Mason?
I was, till they had trouble over here in the plant back in '39,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't go out. And they called me, the master of the Masons of the lodge at that time, called me a scab. And I just withdrew from the Masonry, and that's it. I can't see it, I'll have to.
I have that article about this old Cherokee that was 100 years old. Would you like to look at it?
Yeah, I would.
You might get some data.
No, I filled every lodge, every seat in the Blue Lodge.
Mm-hmm. I'm a Blue Lodge member. I'm up at Bartlesville.
Yeah,
That's my lodge.
yeah. Yeah, I worshipful master.
Well, they had some disagreements.
505.
With business, and that's what.
505 here at
Mm-hmm.
but I thought the fellows, the way he felt about it, was I was privileged to stay. I was a foreman in the plant, and the foremans didn't come out, and I didn't come out. But he and I were sitting lodge together, and he made the wrong cue. He said I was a scab. Well, I wasn't no scab. And I said, well, if that's the way that your masonry is, I said, I'm through with you. I don't want no more. I never did go back.
Yeah.
Now
What-
my picture, they've got my picture in that Masonic Hall over there because I'm a past master.
Mm-hmm. What plant was that?
What?
What plant?
Well, Mid-Continent.
Oh, Mid-Continent Oil?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I lodge. What lodge?
No, what plant were you working in?
Oh, Mid-Continent.
Yeah.
That was in 39, I think.
Mm-hmm. How come, you told me that you left home because of picking cotton. When you left home, where did you go? Said you were 17 years old?
Yeah, I went to Kansas and worked in the harvest field. Went up through Nebraska working in the harvest fields. Up into South Dakota in the harvest fields, and I stayed up there and worked for a farmer in South Dakota.
Mm-hmm. What part of South Dakota?
Plankington was the place where the little town where we
Mm-hmm.
Plankington, South Dakota.
What did you do in the harvest?
Oh, them days they had what they call a header that headed the grain. They cut it off about 6 inches down below the head, and they'd haul that and dump it into that wagon, and they'd haul it to a place and stack it in big stacks. And I worked in that, hauling that. And then when the thrashing time come on, they'd make them stacks. They'd put one here and one over here. And when the thrashing machine come in to thrash the grain out, they'd pull right up between them stacks, and 2 men could work from that stack and 2 from this stack over here, and they'd keep that thing going until they thrashed all that grain out. And they had wagons there that thrashed that grain right into the wagons.
How long from the time you cut the wheat till it was thrashed?
Well, that depended on when you could get a thrasher.
Mm-hmm.
Them thrashing machines wasn't very too many of them in the country them days, and you'd have to. That's why they stacked it. They could hold it, you see, till till the thrasher could come.
Was the thrasher steam powered?
He had a big old steam engine that pulled a separator, and he fired that engine with coal. Them days, they were using coal in them big old engines. They didn't have rubber tires either. They had steel tires.
How long did you work in the wheat harvest?
Oh, I worked through it about 3 different years.
Mm-hmm. When did you return to Oklahoma?
Well, I didn't return to Oklahoma for quite a while. I went to, after I left South Dakota, I come back to Omaha, and I went to Boyd's Business College there, and I took to be an operator.
Telegraph operator.
And I worked at that a while, and I found a job that I could make more money at than I could at that. I just quit the telegraph operating, and I just kept shifting around. Got down here into Oklahoma, and my father and mother come from Vian. They was running a hotel there at Vian. They come from there up to 1914. They come to Okmulgee, and I was up in Nebraska, I believe, at that time, and I came down to Okmulgee and accidentally run into trouble.
What kind of trouble, or should I ask?
It's lasted though.
I found me a boss right there in Okmulgee.
What was her name?
Grace Opal Dixon.
Yeah, we'll be married 68 years in February.
68. That's a long time with one woman.
That's right. Put up with one man.
I couldn't get rid of her.
Where'd you meet her?
At a revival meeting.
1914?
No, it was later than that.
16, I guess, or 17.
I was working in the glass plant there when I met her.
What's your name again, your full name?
Grace Opal Dixon, Dixon.
What year were you all married?
1917, February 17th.
What did you do during World War One?
World War One, I was World War One. I was a welder. I was working for the Empire Refining Company, and when we registered for war, they put me in A4. And they was using me in their refinery because they needed all the gasoline they could get them days, you see.
Where was the refinery located?
Okmulgee.
Mm-hmm. What did you learn to weld?
I just picked it up. There was a fellow by the name of Moon. He was a salesman for the Oxwell acetylene equipment, and he come down there. I was working at a foundry, machine shop, and a boiler shop, all combined.
It was United Iron Works.
And he sold them an outfit to run a cutting torch with, and he taught us how to use a cutting torch, and that's about all there was to it. And how to operate the generator to make gas, and we use bottled oxygen and acetylene gas for operating them cutting torches. And I picked up the welding and got to where I could do a good job of welding. And finally, I done some pipeline welding, and they built an all welded gasoline plant out about 7 or 8 miles west of Okmulgee. And there wasn't any connections, it was all welded connections. And I welded on that, and another welder by the name of McCarty. And we two welded that gasoline plant up, put it in operation.
Mm-hmm. How did your working conditions change during the war?
Working conditions?
Yeah, during World War One.
I don't know just what you mean by that, but working conditions, I just worked at whatever come up my way, come in front of me, I tried.
Did you have to do more work during the war than before the war?
Yeah, we worked longer hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 10 hours and 12 hours a day was a very common thing back then.
Ma'am, what did you do during the war?
I didn't do anything. I never had work.
Did you help in the war effort?
Oh, I knitted and did
Knitted?
things like that, you know,
Mhm.
but then outside the home, I never worked
Yeah.
outside the home.
Were there any organized efforts to support the war in Okmulgee? Like
Oh.
bond drives?
Oh, yes, they used to have quite a bit of that during World War I.
Mm-hmm.
I took training under Captain, can't call his name now to see mine. Captain Cook. He was there. He asked for volunteers to go along the Mexican border before war broke out. And two of my brothers and myself, we volunteered to go to the Mexican border. And this Captain Cook gave us training, not only us, but there was about 20 of them altogether. And he gave us training in war. He was there quite a little while, and we practiced at our off hours on the things to do and, how to protect ourselves and all that.
Did you go to the Mexican border?
No, we didn't. Didn't have to.
Was that when General Pershing went down to chase Pancho Villa in 1916?
Yeah,
Oh, it was later than that.
Was it later than that?
1916, Persian.
No, it was later than that, because that was after we were married. It must have been about 1918.
Okay.
Like that.
You know, they had, I think they called the Zimmerman Note when they thought Germany was trying to get Mexico to invade the U.S. during World War I.
Yeah, in World War I.
It may have been part of that.
Yeah.
Might have been,
They found out it was all a hoax, though.
yeah,
It wasn't true.
that's right.
Well, that's what we took training for that, but they never sent us to the Mexican border.
Mm-hmm. What kind of training did you take?
Oh, on marching and
Firing arms and
and
things like that, I imagine.
different formations and how to use the guns and the rifles, and we practiced shooting and
What kind of rifles did you have?
what's what?
What type of rifle did you have?
Oh, we had the old Army rifle. I don't know whether it's the old M1s or what,
Mm-hmm.
but we had the old Army rifle that had a bayonet on the end of them.
What did you two do on Armistice Day? November 11th, 1918.
I can tell you exactly. We were living in one part of Okmulgee, and my mother lived on the other side, and our son was 2 months old. And I pushed him from one end of town to the other in a baby buggy. I well remember that day. He's 66 now.
What were you doing on Armistice Day, the day the war ended?
I don't know.
I think he was that's when he was working then, let's see. I don't know whether he was working at this iron place is where he was working, this United Iron Works, because I know we. Yes, I always think that when I pushed James down clear across town, it was quite a ways too. We did a lot of walking in those days during the war and everything.
Okay. What did you do after the war? Did you continue working at the refinery?
Yeah, I come from after the war, yeah. I finally settled down. I settled down here in Tulsa
We
with
came
the,
up here after the war.
with this refinery over here.
Mid-continent?
Okay, it
It
was
was,
Cosden.
it was J.S. Cosden Company then. And J.S. Cosden Company, Jacob France got controlling interest in him, and he took it away from J.S. Cosden, and it became the Mid-Continent Petroleum Company. And then in 1925, the Sun Oil Company got a hold of it, and it become Sun DX. And then they finally dropped the DX and just called it the Sun Company.
He worked there 35 years. That's where he retired.
Yeah. Do you all remember the race riots,
Oh, yes.
1921?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Let me tell you about that. I worked at the refinery, and I got fired. I got fired for fighting. And I went back and I built this gasoline plant I was telling you about west of Okmulgee. And in the meantime, I had made a duck blind out of steel. I made a duck blind for Mr. Kuntz. He was president of the company. And he and some judge at Muskogee had this duck blind, and they put it in a lake. And he called up and wanted me to make another duck blind. I told him I wasn't with the company anymore. So he told him to find out where I was at. Well, I had just finished up down there, and I come back to Tulsa, and I went back to work for And now the race riot come on that night. It was March the 31st.
Wasn't it in June?
No, it was May the 31st was, I believe it was. The 31st, and anyhow that night, I heard some, I had a room where this Oklahoma hospital is now. It was residential houses there. And I had a room there, and I had just gone to bed. And about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, I heard somebody hollering and taking on. And I looked out the window, and I seen some men down there, and they had a Model A car, and they had 3 or 4 colored men in that car, and they was trying to get them to the hospital, and they wouldn't let them get in there. And then they called out the National Guard, and they come to Tulsa, and they got here the next morning. But anyway, they cleaned out that colored town over there. And there's no telling, nobody ever knew how many was killed, but there was a lot of them killed that nobody ever knew anything about. And they just cleaned that town out. Now, the race riot started over a colored boy attacked a girl in an elevator. That's what started the race riot.
That supposedly was, I don't know.
How long did that riot last?
Oh, it only lasted a couple of days.
Did they burn any of downtown Tulsa?
No, it was all the north on
They just burned out that black
the
colored
north
town
part,
people.
The north part, they used to have their own, well, it's all built back now, a lot of it has, but they destroyed the complete, and all up on Reservoir Hill, and if you're very familiar with that, why, it was a terrible thing, now that's all, it was so uncalled for.
Are there still hard feelings about that?
I don't think so, no.
Well, all the people that took part in it them days is gone.
Yeah.
I don't think they have
And the
any.
younger generation,
no.
they don't, you never see much out of them, but they still think about it, I'll tell you. They're not as brave here as they are some other towns. The colored people are not. They know what happened, and they fear things.
No, it was used to when back in, I'll say 60 years ago or so, you never saw a colored person in Tulsa. They all stayed on their own part of the town. But of course now, you know, it isn't that way now, but no, it was a terrible thing.
Did the depression of the 1930s affect you all?
No, it didn't affect us because he was working, he had a good job, and
It did affect us.
well, we had to help support the rest of the family that was out of work, but just,
It hurt us a whole lot. It took all I could make to keep them from going on charity. And our son that lives down here now, a couple of doors down here from us, he was just a young fellow, and he couldn't find a job nowhere. He just couldn't. They was laying him off everywhere, you know. And we sent him out, give him money, and he went to San Francisco and thought maybe could get a job out there somewhere in the shipyards or something. But he couldn't get a thing out there, and he finally had to come back. And all these things, it took all that I could make to keep things going. Hold it, in other words, to hold us together.
December 7th, 1941.
Yeah,
Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor.
yeah.
What were you all doing that day?
I don't remember that. I really don't. I can't remember that. But
Well, I was working over at the refinery.
I don't remember anything outstanding.
What did you two do for the war effort in World War II?
I didn't do much of anything. I didn't. What's real strange, I've never had a social security number until the IRS decided about a month ago that I had to have one. But that's true because Jerry took me out to the social security, so I have one supposed to be coming. No, I never worked. I just stayed home.
Well, I worked right on through it all the time.
But and then our youngest son was killed in World War II in the European theater.
He was.
March
He met his. He come
16th,
to.
1945.
He was in Patton's army, and they was in Holland, driving the Germans out of Holland, and he was killed in Holland.
He stepped on a landmine. He was in the Corps of Engineers.
And when did you move into this house?
And August 28th, 1937.
Did you build the house?
No. A man worked at the refinery, a pipe fitter, had the house built. His name was Cox, Rufus Cox, and we was living on the farm out here on 51st Street, about 5 miles from here, 80 acres out there, and we traded him that 80 acres, and for this house, and $500, he gave us $500 to boot.
And ma'am, where were you born?
In Mystic, Iowa,
When's your birthday?
November 1st. I was born in 1898.
How come you came to Oklahoma?
Oh, my father and mother and another family decided, I guess they thought everybody was getting rich in Oklahoma, so we all came to Oklahoma. And I was only 8 years old, but I can remember that this family and my family, what they call chartered a boxcar, and they brought some stock, and I can't remember much about it, and all their household goods, and my mother and I and this other woman and her children, and we all came on the train, and they came in the boxcar, my older brother and my father and this other man and his son. And we located in Okmulgee, and of course that's where I lived until we were married.
Did you come there about 1906?
In 1906. I think it was in February, if I remember.
Can both of you tell me what you did on Statehood Day?
No, I sure
Sit
can't.
still.
What were you doing on Statehood Day, November 16th, 1907?
Oh, 1907, November, that's when it becomes statehood.
Right.
I don't know what I was doing. I don't remember.
Okay, that'd be about 17 years old. You were probably on wheat harvest then, weren't you? Had you left home at that time?
Long about that time I left home.
Mm-hmm. Ma'am, do you remember Statehood Day?
No, I can't. We lived on a farm out east of Okmulgee there, but I can't remember anything about it.
What kind of chores did you do in the farm?
Oh, I didn't do much, only around the house. I never worked in the field or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. What about, did you help your mother make soap?
Yeah, you didn't make soap.
You did, but I
You
didn't.
did?
Oh,
My mother
yeah.
never. I don't know, my mother never did.
Tell me about making soap.
Used to have a big old ice hopper, we called it. It was made out of boards, and them boards, we had a hollow log about 6 foot long, or maybe 8. And these boards would go down, these ends of them, in that hollow log. And we could pour ashes over in there, and way up high, you could put a lot of wood ashes in there. And we used to clean out the fireplace and everything, and put them ashes in that, you might call it a hopper, ash hopper. And when they got ready to make soap, we'd pour water over them ashes, and it'd filter down through them ashes into that hollow log and run into a big old black pot. And used to boil clothes and things in pots, you know, wood fire around them. And that acid or lye would drain into that log, and Mother'd take the fat and grease and all a whole bunch of stuff, you know, and that acid out of that ashes would cook that, make it, I guess,
I made the soap, but
made it be.
I never made any soap. I don't know.
Well, Mother used to cut it out and put it up on a plank. And she'd cut it out with a big butcher knife in bars, and it'd be about that long,
About 6 inches long?
yeah, 6 inches long or maybe longer, and they'd be about 3 or 4 inches thick. And we used that for washing clothes, washing dishes, and taking the baths and everything else. That was the only soap we had.
Mm-hmm.
But finally we got to where we could buy some soap, and we thought that is something wonderful when we could buy soap. And we never dreamed about the things that lay ahead of us. We never dreamed
His
about
mother,
that.
too, I've heard her tell about how she had to spin all the wool, knit all the socks, and there were 6 boys and 1 girl. So she wasn't idle much.
Mm-hmm.
I think they all have their good old days at once, and I don't think I cared about that.
Did you have to chop wood for the fireplace?
Oh yeah, had to build fires in the fireplace and everything else. We had to take a week about building fires in the fireplace. And if you didn't get in some kindling wood, what we call kindling wood, was some rich pine, we'd go out into the hills and haul in rich old trees, and the heart of them and the limbs of them would be rich in turpentine. And we'd haul them in, and if you didn't split up some of that to get your fire started, you was in trouble. What I mean, getting the fire started. And it's up to you. If it was my week to build fires, I sure would cut up the kindling and get the kindling in and lay it down there so I'd have it the next morning, and I'd uncover the fire what is left. We'd bank it at night, and if there's a little left there, you put that kindling on there, and boy, just in no time, you'd have a fire going. Jump back in bed then till the house kind of warmed up.
How big was that house in Arkansas?
Oh, it's a pretty good sized house.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it is Well, it's compared to about a 4-room house now.
Large rooms too, I imagine.
What kind of mischief did you and your brothers get into when you were kids?
Mischief?
Yeah.
Well, I'd hate to tell you some of the things we done. I'll tell you though, we rented some part of the land to a fellow by the name of Riley Reynolds, and his wife was Dealey Reynolds, and they had one son, and they had a team of these big Texas steers that he used for everything. He plowed with them and he hauled with them and everything else. And you know what a yoke is, don't you?
Yes, sir.
How steers are yoked together?
Yes, sir.
Well, them big old yokes had a ring in the middle, and he could hitch his wagon tongue to it, and he could put them to a wagon, or he could put them to a plow, and anything else. Well, I used to follow him in the field, and when they go to turn around, he let me wham him with a big old whip he had, you know, bull whip. And them steers was Lep and Bally. And boy, I thought the world of all of old Lep and Bally. And now, we was on a vacation to Hot Springs one time, and James, our son here, lives down there. He was about, how old was he? Well,
Oh, I don't know.
he was about 7 or 8, I guess. We'd come from Hot Springs on a vacation trip, and we come back to Mena and visited Riley and Dealey.
They were real old
In the-
people. We went to visit them.
And they had built a big log house, and they just had one son, George, and they had windows,
No, they just had one window in the house.
but it was they had a shutter for it. You could pull it too, you know, and put a pin in it. So that was the law. But anyway, they had a mantle above the fireplace that they kept things up on that mantle. Well, anyway, what I was getting to, the next morning, we sat there to leave. But that night I told Riley, I was showing him Jerry's scout axe.
Not Jerry, James and Jean scout axe. They were boys.
And
They might have been
he'd
older
never
than that.
seen one. And he just kept turning that little old axe over and over and over, looking at it, you know. And I told Jerry, I said,
Jim.
Jim, I said, you give that axe to Uncle Riley and I'll buy you a new one when you get home. So he told Uncle Riley, you just give it to him. He could have it. And boy, that just tickled that old man. He was sure.
Now they were typical. They just lived
And
down
the
there.
next morning we got ready to leave, I gave him our tent where we camped, you know, and I gave him that tent and everything. And we had a good night talk and visit with him. But they were our nearest neighbors there when
They were real old people at that time. I don't
Yeah.
remember how old, but they were.
you know, people didn't have much to get along with back in them days.
That's right.
It's wonderful. I'm glad to see it, but it's wonderful that all the modern things that we have today that we never dreamed of. The good Lord has been good to us, I'll tell you. He's given men with ingenuity enough to build and make everything that we think that we need, but there's always something new.
That's right.
Something new coming in, just like these war material that they're building and inventing and flying to the moon. Who ever thought we'd ever go to the moon, put a man on the moon? They'd have thought you was crazy way back in our days.
That's right. Do you remember?
Can I get you a cup of coffee?
Yes, ma'am.
What do you use? Do you use cream
No,
sugar?
just black.
Just black?
Yes, ma'am.
We use instant. I don't know
Oh,
you.
that's fine, that's fine. Do you, when you first heard about the Wright brothers,
But who?
the Wright brothers, they made the first flight in 1903.
Oh, yeah.
What did you think about that?
Well, people didn't think they'd ever do it. Didn't think they'd ever make a flight of it. But they finally did make a flight of it. Now just stop and think for a minute what it come to. The ingenuity of man. Look what they've done. Now, another thing, I can't understand why they would deliberately wreck that big plane, passenger plane, day before yesterday, I guess it was, or Saturday. You read about that, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
In California?
Right.
And the news said that they was 20 minutes of getting the fire put out, and they didn't find out what they really thought they would altogether, but there's going to make a study of it, more of it, to see. I can't figure out why they do that, but they're doing it to make it safer for people to travel.
Right. When did you see your first automobile?
Well, I'll tell you, it was in Kansas.
What did you think about it?
Well, I didn't know. I went up to work in the harvest fields, and I went to Wichita, Kansas. And there was a man came there, I can't remember his name, but he was a great big husky young fella, and he wanted 6 men in Wichita. There's a whole bunch of men, I don't know how many, and he wanted 6 men to work in the harvest field. And there was a preacher there, and I was standing next to this preacher, and this preacher had worked in the harvest field, and he told this fellow, he said, well, he said, I've worked in the harvest field as stacker, and he said, well, I'd like to have you. And he looked at me, and he said, I'll take you. And then took 4 others, it took 6 of us, and from Wichita, we went to Pratt, Kansas. And from Pratt, Kansas, we went up to Iuka. That was where he farmed. And we went out on the farm of the widow Webster. This man was her son-in-law. And they had a big old, she had a big old Rambler, red Rambler automobile. Had run boards on it, you know, and everything. And that was the first car that I ever rode in. And then when I come back from Dakota and went to Omaha, I had a room, and I was a rooming with a demonstrator for Ford Motor Company there at Omaha, and the Model T Fords, and his name was Ray Klein. And Ray and I, we'd ride them, we'd follow the railroad tracks, follow the streetcars, behind the streetcars on the railroad tracks at night, you know. And the daytime, he'd teach people how to drive a Model T.
The other time I'd had some homemade cookies, but didn't have today.
That's fine, thank you.
Oh, boy.
Did you work in the fields on the farm?
Work in the field?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How many acres could you plow in one day with a walking plow?
Oh, I'll tell you, I'd imagine you'd do pretty well if you plowed 2 or 2.5 acres with a walking plow. It depended a whole lot on how close your rows was together. If you had row stuff, now in the cotton fields, in the bottom lands, you have to put the rows about 6 foot apart. Well, if you was plowing cotton, you could turn off more acreage, you see. But if you're plowing corn where the rows is only about 30 inches apart, well, you'd have to do more close-in plowing. It'd be hard to tell just how many acres you could plow a day. But it all depended on how close your rows was together.
Did you plow with horses or mules?
What?
Did you plow with horses or mules?
Oh, both.
Which do you prefer?
I take a mule
How come?
because they're smarter. They're smarter than horses. You can't get a mule around a burn.
Today is December 3rd, 1984. This is Joe Todd, and interview with Mr. Rufus Murray Thames.
Yes.
Mr. Thames, where were you born?
I was born in Waters, Arkansas, 1890. It later became known as Pine Ridge by Lum and Abner, and they're broadcasting from the Jot 'em Down store.
When is your birthday? In
October 7, 1890.
Who is your father?
Robert Henry Thames.
And your mother?
Mother Sarah Emily Thames, Jones.
Joe.
Sarah Emily Jones Thames, it should have been.
Were they both from Arkansas?
Yes, sir.
What kind of work did your father do?
Well, he was a farmer, and he hauled freight and hauled passengers from town, them little towns, and we lived on the river, on the Arkansas River at Tamaha. Tamaha, Tamaha, as the Choctaws called it.
That's in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And
When did you come to Indian Territory?
1898 to begin with. We went back to Arkansas, Mena, Arkansas, after that, and we lived in Mena about 5 years. Then we came back to Tamaha, and I can't remember what year it was we come back about that time, but it's before statehood.
How come you moved to Tamaha?
Well, I had an uncle living there to begin with, and we went up there. They used to raise a lot of potatoes along the river bottom there, that sandy land, you know. And we went up there to pick up and haul potatoes. His way, he'd work himself around it. But you come as trying to gee or haul him, and boy, you're in trouble. But a horse, you can get a horse right around it.
How did you remove stumps from your field?
How did what?
How did you remove stumps from your field? Tree stumps.
Burn them down.
Burn them down?
Burn them down in the fall year after the crops was all gathered in. In the new land, they didn't cut the trees down all at once. They deaden them, chop them around, go around the tree, chop it all around, you know, cut the bark all around it, and just leave it till it died. And that's the way they cleared up a lot of what they call new ground land. They deadened the trees and just leave them stand there till they got older, and the wind had come and storms and break them down and all that kind of stuff. You had lots to do to keep a farm up.
Mm-hmm.
Besides, you had to make rails to fence with, you know. My daddy used to split them rails and make rail fences, you know, for things.
Did you help make the rail fence?
Yeah,
What kind of wood makes the best rail fence?
post oak,
Post oak?
yeah. They split better.
Why not blackjack?
Oh, no. Blackjack ain't fit for anything on the firewood. Makes good firewood.
Did you ever
Blackjack trees don't get very big.
ever help break out land in Arkansas? Ever clear land?
Clear.
Yeah.
Did what?
You ever clear land in Arkansas?
River?
Clear.
No, clear it. Need new farmland?
I don't quite catch it.
Did you ever clear land?
Oh, clear land? Yeah.
How long does it take to clear an acre?
Oh, I don't know. I took a contract one time to clear 5 acres, and I don't think I ever got it done. I'll say one thing though. We bought a bunch of land from when we went from Indian Territory back to Arkansas at Mena, and my daddy bought some land off of a widow woman, and it had lots of timber on it. And we cut every bit of timber off of that land. There wasn't a tree left on it. At that time, the railroad shops were there at Mena. The Kansas City Southern had their railroad shops there, and everybody burned wood. And we'd cut that and split the what we call stove wood. That was for cook stoves, and the heater wood was for fireplaces. Was regular chunky wood, you know. And we'd haul it into town. We got $1 a load for it, and $1.25 for the stove wood. And we'd rick it up to show them that we had a rick.
How long did it take to cut a rick?
Oh, it wouldn't take long. We'd cut about 5 or 6 rick a day. It depends on how brisk you sawed. You'd cut them trees down and saw them up, and you learn how to take advantage of sawing them or throwing them down so you can saw them without binding your saws. You've got to have them so that the one you're cutting off, the weight of it will, open up the gap so your saw won't bind. And your saw there, if you don't watch, you get binding your saw. You'll take all the set out of your saw first thing you know, and you've got to overhaul it.
How do you sharpen your saw?
Oh, with a file and the teeth. There's a drag. It's a little forked outfit, and the teeth are tapered. They're left and right, and you sharpen one side of it, and then you go on the other side, or turn it around and sharpen the other side of them teeth. In them days, they made a saw set. You lay it down and pull your saw across there and hit the tooth with a hammer. This thing here was tapered, and you'd hit it with a hammer, and it would bend that tooth down just a certain amount, see? And you come to the next and do the same. You turn your saw over and do the same thing to the others. And that's the way you put the set in there. But the drag that pulled the dust out of the gap, you didn't put any set in it. It'd pull the dust out, you see.
What kind of stock did you raise in the farm?
What kind of stuff?
Yeah, stock. Did you have cattle, hogs?
Oh, you said cattle?
You have cattle and hogs in the farm?
That's right. Cattle and hogs is all we ever raised.
Tell me about butchering hogs.
But who?
Butchering hogs?
Oh.
What time of year would you butcher?
In the fall of the year when the meat could be easy.
Winter time.
This would be a good time of the year to butcher. But we'd butcher them in the summertime. Sometimes it wouldn't take long to eat up one.
Mm-hmm.
And we could put them in brine, a salty brine, and the meat will keep in a salty brine, and till you could use it up in the summertime if you wanted to kill a beef or a hog. But hog killing time come along, you get 'em good and fat, you know, shoot 'em or knock 'em in the head with an axe. Either way, you hit 'em between the eyes with an axe, you've got him. And stick 'em, you know, and bleed 'em right good. And get their, what we call, stick 'em into the heart. And you let that blood all run out of 'em. And put 'em in a barrel of boiling hot water. And turn 'em over, twist 'em in that barrel, and pull 'em out, and then change ends, put the other end of 'em in, pull 'em out on a platform or something where you could scrape 'em, take all the hair off of 'em, just slicker than a whistle. And then you'd hang 'em up and gut 'em and drain 'em out, and that was it. Cut 'em up, salt 'em down after they drained out.
Make the lard out of the fat. Shortening.
Mm-hmm. How much lard could you render out of a good-sized hog?
Oh, I wouldn't say. Really, I don't know. I imagine my mother could tell you right to.
No, she probably didn't weigh it. She just knew.
How about curing hams? How'd you cure your ham?
Smoke your hams.
Oh, well, they had a smokehouse. Everybody nearly had smokehouses, and they could burn wood in them smokehouses,
Hickory.
and that wood, you know, would the smoke from that wood would smoke them, you know.
What kind of wood did you use?
Well, they'd use oak.
No, hickory.
Huh?
Hickory's what they always smoke with. I know that.
Is what?
Hickory. Hickory wood.
Hickory?
Oh, we use oak. The smoke will cure the ham.
Mm-hmm. How long would it take to smoke a ham?
Oh,
Oh, several days.
you wouldn't have to. You build a fire in there on the ground on that smokehouse, and leave it burn out. And if it wasn't smelled like you thought it would, well, you put some more on there. And what that smoke and heat does, it kind of dries it out, you see, to be sure that it's all dried out. And they go into them hip joints and open up the joint and let the joint water out. That's where the meat starts spoiling, is them joints that's in them. You know, if you don't drain them joints, well, it'll start souring in that joint and they spoil.
How did you build a smokehouse?
Well, we built it out of logs and chinked and daubed it with
Dirt.
grass and mud. We'd make what we call cats. Take the grass and mix up a mud and put that grass in there and roll it up and make a great long, what called them cats, and shock them in them cracks, you know, and you could make one tight.
How big was the smokehouse?
Oh, I don't know. I never seen too many of them, but what I've seen of them, I'd say there was about 8 by 8 or 8 by 10.
Tell me some. You say you don't know much about the Choctaws down around Tamaha and Stigler.
Yeah, I don't know much about them. No, I went to school with them.
You speak any Choctaw?
No,
too bad that you couldn't have saw that old man that we were talking about, 100 years old. Now, he could have told you about the Indians.
Yeah.
If he had been still living, he was just as alert as
Is he
could
still
be.
living, this Alberti?
He's
Yeah.
living in Omaha now.
Yeah.
I think he's in a nursing home. He went up there with his daughter, but I don't know where he's at. But a year or so ago, he could really have, he could, on his birthday, we went to see him, and he was just as alert as he could be, and he could tell you all about it.
George McGee was that man, Indian name that I tried to think of way back there, that give me the literature on the Cherokees.
Have you still got, do you know where that's at? I wouldn't have any idea.
Who?
Do you know anything about where that literature is?
Yeah, it's in one of these drawers back here in this buffet.
I'll see if I
It's
can
on
find
a-
it for you.
It's on blue paper. The paper's about as big as this. It's on blue paper. I don't know. It's all rolled up. I don't know.
We'll try and look it up, and Jerry could let you have it.
Did you know Tom Buffington?
Buffington.
He was chief of the Cherokees.
No.
No.
I don't think so.
He lived up around Veneta.
I
No.
didn't know him.
Well, I'm trying to think. What else can we talk about?
I don't know. I think you've got his life's history right there.
Anything that we missed that you want to talk about?
I don't know of anything. I wouldn't want to tell it.
So we talked about the steamboats.
Yeah, old Captain Blakely.
Did you ever go with your father when he hauled passengers to Stigler?
Yeah, I drove the wagons myself.
Oh, I was going to ask you, what type of maintenance did you have to pull on the wagons?
What do you have to put on a wagon?
Yeah, maintenance. You have to work on the wagons?
Yeah, you have to take the nuts off of the spindles, the wheels. Now, when you took the nut off, you could take hold of the top of the wheel and pull it out like that. It'd lean out a little bit, and that spindle where you pull the wheel out, you had to grease it, and it had wagon dope.
What's that made of, wagon dope?
I don't know. It was a thick fluid, a thick paste. We had a little paddles. We'd
About
stick
like
them
shoe
paddles in
polish.
there and get a bunch of it, put it on that spindle, and put it up and down like that. Then put that wheel back on there, and they do that on all four
Well, it's
wheels.
like this, you know, this grease that you, I
Yeah.
guess you can still buy that.
That is called axle grease.
Axle grease.
And
That's
then-
all I know, just axle grease.
And sometimes the dry weather, them steel rims would expand on the wagons, you know, and they had wooden fellows, spokes, and them fellers we called them, spokes with a run from the hub here up to and this hot weather would expand that steel wheel, and they'd get loose on there, and they'd run off. You'd lose your wheel if you didn't watch, and we had to watch all things like that. We used to haul water from a creek in this dry weather where the gin was, the old gin, the gin cotton. We'd put 2 or 3 barrels in a wagon and back them in that deep water and just dip it up, you know, and fill them. And we'd use that for the stock, and getting them wagon wheels wet and everything, well, that kept it from.
If you did lose a tire, what would you do?
The wheel come all to pieces. Them fellers have come apart.
How do you?
Then you'd have to take it to the blacksmith to where he could put it back together and cut the wheel and shrink it.
How do they shrink the wheel?
Well, you could cut it out and re-weld it.
Then how do they get the tire over the wheel itself?
Well, you'd expand it and get it over the wheel and then pour water on it and let it contract and it would tighten up.
Mm-hmm. So they have to heat the tire then to get it over.
Yeah.
Mm.
Took a blacksmith to do it. They could do it.
Who was the blacksmith at Tamaha?
Well, there was two. There's two blacksmiths, and one of them was Charlie Boger. He was a good blacksmith for horses and mules. He had a lift that he'd put under horses and mules and lift them up off of the ground, and they
Walk and tackle, I guess.
they couldn't kick him. He was a big fellow, you know, and he didn't want to have to wrestle him, and that's the way he did it. And the other man, he'd shoe him without anything like that. There's a woman lives here in Tulsa. Her father was the man I'm talking about, and he had a family, and we knew one another real well. Went to school together. We kids did.
What's her name?
Boger, Charlie Boger.
Oh, that's not her name.
The daughter's name.
Huh?
What?
She isn't well, though.
She's not.
Eva Bella.
Yeah.
She isn't a bit well, though. She's 88 and she's very crippled with arthritis. She doesn't even get out of the house.
Well, I think we've covered almost everything.
I believe you did a pretty good job.
Well, I've enjoyed this.
Well, we've enjoyed having you. Talking about Bartlesville, I was trying to think, do you know a school teacher, Bland Cunningham? I think he's superintendent in one of the schools.
The name is familiar.
Well, Bland grew up out here in Berry Hill.
Yeah.
Real nice fellow.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sir, thank you.